I've made countdowns of my favorite TV shows that aired within a year for these past 3 years, and this countdown is basically that, but with more years added. I'll definitely repeat myself a bunch, but since this countdown covers 10 years as opposed to just one, some new shows I haven't discussed before might show up. I might also give additional insight into shows I've already talked about in length, especially seeing as some of them started before I began covering them, meaning I've only discussed specific seasons. I only count shows that started within the last decade, so I don't count shows that started before last decade that continued into the next, like Breaking Bad or Phineas and Ferb. That would be kind of hard to rank since I'd have to limit them, and while that is the case with some shows on this list that continued into this year, those are just small portions of them that shouldn't affect my ranking. So, with that said, let me tell you what my top 12 favorite TV shows of the last decade were. Wait, 12? That's an unusual countdown number. Well, the two shows I'm talking about first are shows I recently got into that I can see climb higher on my ranking in the future, but at the moment I don't feel quite confident to have them be part of the top 10. Number 12. Haikyuu. I didn't watch this show until this year, so maybe it's cheating to put it on a list about the last decade, but I just had to talk about this one, and it does have 3 seasons released from 2014 to 2016. Haikyuu is probably the show I can identify with the most, as it's about volleyball and I used to play that sport. You'd think a show centered around a sport would be dull, but it's far from it, as it not only does a brilliant job at showcasing the intricacies of volleyball, but it has a well-defined cast of characters as well, and that doesn't just go for the main characters at Karasuno either. The show has a really big number of characters, considering how many different teams there are, and while not every character gets the limelight, the show does such a good job at making you root for the competition. Sure, you'll cheer for Karasuno whenever they win, but you'll also feel bad for the teams that they beat. That was especially the case in episode 16, which was an episode that showed all of the losses from the first day of a tournament, and it was sad, man. I can definitely relate to that. On that topic, I think my favorite episode was episode 24 of season 1, where Karasuno actually lost a very important match. Granted, I found out the repercussions wouldn't be as severe as I had thought, as they still had a chance to enter nationals, but it was still very shocking that it happened, and after such an amazing match too. It also forced the members of Karasuno to grow, so that they could eventually beat the team they lost to, that being Seijo in another of my favorite episodes, that being episode 24 of season 2. I swear, the matches against Seijo have been the best of the series. They're just so personal and tactical. What about the 5-set match against Shiro Torisawa then? That would be my third favorite, as while it was fantastic, I don't care that much for the team's members, and I thought the third set was rushed, while the short 5th set dragged on, but that second set might be the best in all of Haikyuu. Episode 4 of season 3 is also a top 3 episode, where Tsukishima was able to block Ushijima, who's a top 3 spiker of the nation, and has pretty much been impossible to block for anyone. Suki was able to do that because of 4D chess plays and annoying the other team's setter enough to make a slightly bad set. He was clearly the MVP of the match, and him screaming victoriously, signifying that he finally likes volleyball, was such an emotionally satisfying payoff. That being said, he's not my favorite character. That would almost go to the hilarious Tanaka or Nishinoya, but honestly, I find Karasuno's setter Kageyama the most interesting. He might not be the cheeriest or funniest, although he can be really funny, but his development has been steady and fascinating. He starts out as an asshole who can't properly communicate how he wants others to play, but from the moment he enters Karasuno, he becomes a much better person and learns how to work as a team. He does still have communication issues, but that's mostly a focus in season 4, which was released in 2020, so I'm not talking about that in this video. Even so, Kageyama is a truly fascinating character, and that's not even acknowledging his incredible setting powers. I feel like I have to mention the main character Hinata, who's also a great character, and when it comes to him and Kageyama, you really can't have one without the other. They're such a lovely duo who complement each other, not just in terms of their playstyles, but also their personalities. They constantly clash with each other and put one another back on the right track, and it's beautiful to see, especially considering how antagonistic they treated each other at the start of the series. Anyhow, I've talked a lot about this show now, so I'll conclude by saying that Haikyuu is a great show that might make you want to get into volleyball. Hell, I felt the urge to play some volleyball again while watching it, and you know what? I kind of wish I had seen this back in 2014 while I was still playing, because it could have made me appreciate playing more, and the show really did teach me a lot of valuable things that would have been helpful back then. So it's not just a well-written show, but it can also teach you a great deal about volleyball. Number 11. Steins Gate and Steins Gate Zero. I know Zero isn't nearly as well liked as the original Steins Gate, but honestly, I like it almost as much, so I figured why not just include it. These are also shows I've watched rather recently, but I did watch them early 2019, so it has been a while. Still, my opinions on them aren't fully defined yet, but I am currently in the process of rewatching them, so I guess they will be soon. Steins Gate is for many an acquired taste, as the first half is considered very slow, and while that is true, I actually really enjoyed this first half. It does a great job at setting the tone and characters, and the dialogue is absolute genius. The show has some of the most dynamic interactions I've seen, and makes the characters all the more likable. The latter half of the show is definitely where it's at though, and it's one of the most thrilling and heart-wrenching sets of episodes ever. Seriously, Steins Gate and Zero are some of the hardest shows not to cry from. The very fact that Mayuri, who's the sweetest person ever, is the one to die over and over again makes it so hard not to. She's for sure my favorite female character, she's just super sweet and always brings the mood up. You can even see that in Okabe, who breaks his facade a little whenever she supports him. Their friendship is beautiful, and while the relationship between Okabe and Kurisu is also great, I find his friendship with Mayuri more powerful. That relationship is a big reason why Okabe is my favorite character in the series, as he's so hellbent on going against time to save her. His vulnerable side added a lot to his character beyond his hilarious Hoen Kiyoma persona. That persona for sure brings the best dialogue the series has to offer, being clever, snappy, and so damn funny. I really like both sides of Okabe, so I didn't have much issue with his main characterization in Zero. He's down in the dumps throughout most of that show, but it makes complete sense, considering the events that had transpired, and that made the return of Ho in Kiyoma all the more satisfying. That's one of the reasons episode 21 is my favorite episode of Zero. It's such a legendary comeback. Him time-leaping so many times also highlighted the proof of his ridiculous resolve. It's hard to say what my favorite episode of the original is, a few of them are pretty much on par. Maybe I'll have to go with episode 16, which is another absolutely heartbreaking episode, this time centered around Suzuha, who's probably my third favorite character. Her letter of failure hit like a ton of bricks, and then you find out she committed suicide because of it. Just sad stuff, man. The reveal that Daru's her dad was pretty wholesome and fascinating at the same time, and of course best girl Mayuri was the one to figure it out. I love the endings to both of the shows, the original having such a clever callback to the first episode, really putting everything into perspective and delivering a really happy ending by actually reaching Steins Gate, meaning that neither Mayuri nor Kurisu had to die. Zero also had an emotionally satisfying ending, where plenty of answers were given as to how Steins Gate could happen in the first place, and that ending of Okabe finding Mayuri and Suzuha trapped in ancient times, combined with that Gate of Steiner track, made for one impactful closing scene. Number 10. Voltron Legendary Defender. Okay, so judging by my previous TV shows of the year countdowns, you'd expect Voltron to be higher, right? I myself thought that, but honestly, I feel like I've been overhyping it throughout the years. That's not to say I don't like it anymore, it's just that I've come to realize that it's not as great as I used to think. While the cast is strong and I quite enjoy some of the characters, they aren't some of my favorite characters in TV. Lotor and especially Pidge do come close, but they're not quite there. Lotor is a great villain who successfully took over for the main villain, but he sadly died not that long after, and I thought he would be brought back, but he never was. Also, he became kinda generic in the end, basically throwing his motives out the window. Pidge is for sure my favorite character of the show, as she's smart, funny, and has a very interesting identity crisis that doesn't feel forced, unlike, say, the queer baiting for Shiro. Lance would probably be my third favorite character, but it feels like it didn't amount to much in the end. Neither did the ship between him and Allura, that also felt forced, seeing as Allura never really thought of Lance romantically, and all it led to was a tragic breakup. Isn't that great? Yeah, Season 8 wasn't very good, and I did notice a quality dip with Season 7, although I really liked certain moments. Still, it's a shame the series didn't manage to maintain the consistency from Seasons 2 to 6 that made me truly invested in the show, and I still really like that part. It's hard for me to pick my favorite episode, as there are 3 I enjoy just about as much. It's between Season 2 Episode 7 called Space Mall, Episode 2 of Season 4 named Reunion, or Episode 2 of Season 5 Blood Duel. I can also see myself choosing any of the 3 last episodes of Season 6 if I rewatched the series, but I'm pretty sure I did that before Season 5 came out. I guess since I've already talked in length about Space Mall and Blood Duel, I can talk about Reunion. That episode is solely focused on Pidge, so of course I would love it, especially since it's actually so damn good. It has Pidge searching for her brother Matt, which has been built up since the start, and it's a very emotional roller coaster. It initially seems like Matt actually died when Pidge visits a graveyard, but from what I can remember, it contains a hint about his actual location, and she eventually finds him, which starts out as a fight, since they don't know who they're fighting. When they do realize who they're fighting, they have a heartfelt reunion and team up to fight some assassin who was tracking Pidge, and that fight has awesome choreography. That's another thing, this cartoon, being animated by the same team behind Korra, has some amazing animation, and it's used really well. I will say though, I did get tired of the animation of Voltron forming, as it takes so long, and I so wished they put a spin on it. For example, someone messing up Voltron's formation, kind of like Aang's avatar state in Ba Sing Se. Overall, Voltron is a really good show that I still really like, but it does have a lot of flaws that brings it down, and I think it'll rank even lower in the future, sadly. Number 9. Sherlock. Despite this being the oldest show on my list, I didn't start it until early 2017, but to be fair, that was the year I started checking many shows out, so it's not like I haven't known it for a while compared to most. I watched it solely because at school I had a task to analyze the pilot to a show, and I got invited by some of my classmates to watch Sherlock, so I did just that. Despite being movie length, the episode didn't bore me one bit, and even though I had to rewatch it a few times to give it a proper analysis, I still found myself enjoying it a lot every time. It's probably my favorite pilot episode, and unlike most pilots, it holds up compared to the rest of the show. But is the rest of the show that good? Both yes and no. I think the first season is the best, of course packing an aforementioned amazing season opener, as well as a great season final, and season 2 is up there as well, with the Reichenbach Fall probably being my favorite episode of the series. It's just so tightly written and mind-blowing, with some amazing outsmarting moments between Sherlock and Moriarty. I think the third season was overall weaker than the prior ones, but it still had its moments, the season opener in particular being really entertaining, and the final was pretty cool too, although a bit anticlimactic in the end. The alternative pilot episode wasn't nearly as good as what it parodied, but it was still cool to see it in an old setting that Sherlock Holmes is usually set in. I love how this series modernizes Sherlock Holmes, him and Watson having websites and blogs, and phones being used to solve crimes. Sherlock might not even need that, as his deductive skills are just impossibly excellent, but I love it, and he's by far my favorite character, being real big-brained, hilarious, and really does know how to properly communicate with quote-unquote lower beings. Watson is great too, and is another Martin Freeman portrayal, who I don't see often, but he's brilliant every time he's on screen. Moriarty is a wonderful troll villain, and it's a bit of a shame he wasn't brought back after all that foreshadowing of him potentially being alive. He might be brought back if the series continues, but the show went downhill with the 4th season, so it might be pointless now. I did initially really enjoy the season final of season 4, I said as much 3 years ago, and I might still do, but I have heard many valid criticisms of it. I wasn't that fond of its season opener anyway, but its second episode was pretty strong. Other than a dip in quality after season 2, my other reason for not putting it higher is because I haven't seen the show since I first watched it. That's odd, as I rewatch most of my favorite shows, sometimes more than once, but I just haven't returned to Sherlock for some reason, maybe because the episodes are so long but there aren't many of them, so that's not really an excuse. I did rewatch the Reichenbach Fall maybe a year ago though, and it was so fun to relive. Overall, Sherlock is a great show, but gets held back by later seasons, and me not having rewatched it tells me that it can't really be higher, at least not at the moment. Still worthy of number 9 though. Number 8. Rick and Morty. This is a cartoon that I consider to be very similar to Sherlock, Rick Sanchez being a very similar character, but I feel like this show is just a little bit better and more enjoyable. It also has super tight and mind-blowing writing in some of its episodes, and the creativity it brings is so unique. Not to mention that its comedy is hilarious and often pretty clever. Probably not as clever as the memes would like you to believe, but it does have some outstanding jokes and messages that could easily go over someone's head, including my own. There's just such a fast pace to it with a lot of wit, and I gotta respect it for that. I'd say the smartest episode in the series is the Rick Lantis mix-up from Season 3, Episode 7, as it's just incredibly tightly written with many intertwining threads, showcasing so many sides to a really fascinating society. The main characters aren't even involved, and it's still bloody brilliant. I guess they are heavily involved in some sense, since there are countless Ricks and Mortys, but it's not exactly them. That episode, along with the amazing season opener The Rick Shank Redemption, probably makes Season 3 my favorite, even though it does have a few low points as well. Season 1 is probably my second favorite, because despite having some simple episodes, those were still really damn fun, and episodes 2 and 10 in particular were really deep and hilarious. Season 2 is great, but I feel like I might like it the least, and isn't the most memorable. Still, Total Recall is a standout, where the iconic Mr. Poopy Butthole got introduced, and the season final was pretty rad as well. The first half of Season 4 was quite hit or miss, with 2 meh episodes, but also 3 amazing ones. I would talk about the second half, but since it aired in 2020, I can't count it, and I should withhold some information for the 2020 TV show countdown. Overall, I really like Rick and Morty, but I've never really loved it, so I can't see myself putting it any higher. It just barely beat Sherlock, and I probably wouldn't have let it win had I not gone through the effort of rewatching Rick and Morty, unlike Sherlock. Number 7. Vinland Saga. This is the newest show on my list, so there might be some recency bias involved, but I can confidently say that the writing in the show is great and exceeded my expectations. Yeah, it definitely has a lot of weird anime-isms, what with people who can throw spears hundreds of meters and scale whole forts, but looking away from all that, there's clear realism in characters' motivations and development. Besides, those exaggerations could be justified by the show taking a saga approach, as its name would suggest, so that the very point is to exaggerate these legendary Vikings. It does make for sensational tales and epic fights that aren't among the best I've seen, but they're really well put together and don't last overly long. For only having 24 episodes, the first season packed a lot of depth and introduced us to some well-rounded characters. I don't find the main character Thorfinn very interesting at this point, as he's very one-note, but I can see him getting loads of development after what happened in the season final. That was for sure my favorite episode, as it was very impactful, unpredictable, and tied up the arc's plot so neatly. It also solidified Askeladd as my favorite character by far, as he's such a complex person that you can't help but love, no matter how shitty he might have acted. Another complicated character I took a great liking to was Canute, who started out as such a coward, but quickly manned up after he started seeing the world from a different perspective. A very nihilistic one at that, but he uses it as a basis to improve the world he's been forced to live in. While definitely not as deep, Torkel is just a fun guy, who's maybe the best example of a brute who only cares about fighting, at least seemingly so. You see, that final episode also showed another side of him, that he basically became a mentor to Canute so that Canute could flourish as the new king, and Torkel actually held back instead of killing Askeladd for him. Vinland Saga might only have one season with 24 episodes so far, but those were 24 episodes well spent, and I very much look forward to whatever comes next. Number 6. Stranger Things. Remember that I said I got introduced to Sherlock in early 2017 via classmates in regards to performing an analysis for a pilot episode? Well, that's how I first discovered Stranger Things as well, although I would not get back to it until halfway into 2017. It's not that I didn't like that pilot episode, I really did, but it didn't hook me as much as Sherlock's pilot. That being said, I much prefer Stranger Things as a whole, at least its first season. I don't mean to come off as a season 1 purist, but to be honest, I feel like the show could have ended there. It's pretty much a perfect season in my mind, as it has such good setup, payoff, and is so interwoven. It also has by far my favorite episode, that being the season final, The Upside Down, which is such a great way to cap off that season, and makes me cry hard twice, from 2 scenes that superseded one another. The supposed death of Eleven in front of the other kids hits so hard, and then Will sort of being brought back to life is of course a cheery and relieving moment, but the flashbacks of Hopper's dying daughter just makes it absolutely brutal, especially coming off of another heartbreaking scene. That episode is just superbly directed as well, with all those flashing lights and the terror of the Demogorgon. The later seasons also have really well executed episodes like this, but I just don't feel the same from them. It may be partly because the kids have grown up so much that they seem unrecognizable at this point, but it's also in the way the whole seasons are constructed. I said that season 1 is super interconnected, and that simply isn't the case with the other seasons, where the coming together often feels contrived, and many plot points are swept under the rug. I do really like some of the episodes of season 2 and 3, actually more so than certain individual episodes of season 1, but it's the whole of season 1 that makes me much prefer it over the next seasons. That also goes for most of the characters, who seem to have degraded over the seasons. Like, I very much enjoyed Mike in the first season for his charming gags and wholesome treatment of the Stranger 11, but he became so unlikable in the next season, and I don't have much to say about him when it comes to the third. Joyce was also great in the first season, but also got mostly sidelined after that, and makes jokes that either hit or miss. I partly loved Eleven in the first 2 seasons for her innocence and basically being mute, so I guess it was jarring to have her speak so much in the third, which had to happen eventually, but I'm still not really a fan. Also, I loved the relationship between Mike and Eleven, and it was so satisfying to have them reunite again at the end of season 2, so I really didn't like the direction their relationship took in the third season, and it made Max quite unlikable. Hopper used to be my favorite character, and I loved him in the first 2 seasons, but he felt really off in the third. Thankfully, there is one character who has remained consistently great throughout the series, and that's Steve Harrington, who had a nice redemption arc in the first, became lovable in the second, and continues to be in the third, so he's probably my favorite character at this point. If this show only consisted of seasons 2 and 3, it would be low on the list, but if it was only season 1, it might have been number 5, but that spot has been claimed by a different mysterious show. Number 5. Gravity Falls. At last, here's a show I haven't discussed before on my channel, which is because it ended in 2016 and I didn't make TV show countdowns until 2017, which also happens to be when I first watched this. Kind of like Stranger Things, I'm a bit mixed on this show, but instead of thinking it got worse, this show got way better. Like, I enjoyed the first season, it had some fun ideas, likable characters, and very good humor, but it didn't quite grab me, aside from a select few episodes. It wasn't until season 2 that I realized this is the best cartoon of the last decade, with so many captivating mysteries and very satisfying payoffs. It's pretty insane how detailed these mysteries got, going as far as to even become riddles in real life that only the hardcore would solve. There's so much foreshadowing throughout the series that led to very interesting developments, like Blendon Blandon cleaning up stuff in the background of some of the episodes, or the Society of the Blind Eye memory wiping everyone who witnesses the strange events of Gravity Falls. The author of the 3 journals had the most build up, and it turned out to be Grunkle Stan's brother, who basically made a deal with the devil himself, Bill Cipher. Bill eventually creates Weirdmageddon, which was definitely a tad strange, and made for one of my favorite series finals. On that subject, my favorite episode is the very last one, Weirdmageddon 3 Take Back the Falls, which involved a clever defeat of Bill Cipher and made me incredibly emotional. I love how Alex Hirsch knew when to end the show instead of unnecessarily milking it, which has happened to many other shows over the years that just don't know when to quit, but this show did, and it was probably better for it. I mean, it could probably have a few seasons more, but I thought it pretty much had a perfect length. Well, aside from season 1 being kinda slow, but it was probably necessary to make the later stuff hit harder. My favorite character is the main character Dipper Pines, as he gets the most focus, is smart and cool, with a bit of cheeky. Grunkle Stan follows closely behind, as he's just a hilarious conman and gets a really nice resolution. I'll admit that Gravity Falls doesn't have one of my favorite casts of characters ever, but it's really good, with very fun characters who deliver great dialogue. Also, while season 1 ain't the best, season 2 more than makes up for it, being one of my favorite seasons in TV, so that's why I rank this show so highly. Number 4. Hunter x Hunter. What's this? Yet another show I've never covered on my channel? That's right. I mean, I have offhandedly mentioned it sometimes, but this is the first time I'm giving it focus. I gotta be honest, Hunter x Hunter is also a mixed show for me. I mean, it's bound to be with 148 episodes, and the arcs are of varying lengths and quality. The show starts off decently, although the Hunter x Sam arc is a bit long for my taste. It wasn't until Heaven's Arena where I truly found myself enjoying it, as that's where Nen got introduced, and let me tell you, that might just be the best power system in fiction. You can practically do anything with it, although not without following its rules, that are sometimes harsh if you're simply not born into the right Nen type, unless you're a Kurta, but there aren't many of those. Heaven's Arena also brought some sick fights, including the mind-numbing Hisoka vs Castro and satisfying Gon vs Hisoka. Anything involving Hisoka is great really, but my favorite character is Killua Soldic for sure. He's a very complex little kid with a tragic yet helpful upbringing, as that did lead to his amazing mental and physical capabilities, not to mention electricity and poison resistance, the former of which he developed into an ability as awesome sounding as Godspeed. Dude's a goddamn baller on the battlefield and outside of it, with his impeccable fashion sense and even cooler fighting style. It was Heaven's Arena where Killua started becoming my favorite character, and it just got better as the series continued. Speaking of getting better, the York New arc really kicked the show into a higher gear, with such an interesting villain group in the form of the Phantom Troop, not to mention development for Kurapika that made him so much better. That arc also included the whole gang of Gon, Killua, Kurapika, and Leorio, which I appreciated greatly, as they're rarely together. That's something I didn't like about the series, that Leorio wouldn't show up again in 80 episodes, and Kurapika wouldn't even show up again. I know he does right afterwards in the manga, but that's still such a long hiatus, which is a term that's synonymous with Hunter x Hunter at this point. The next arc, Greed Island, was pretty fun, but like the Hunter exam, a bit too long for my liking. Still, I feel like it's a very underappreciated arc that often gets thrown under the rug, so I'd like to give it credit. Its highlights were the strong bond of Gon and Killua, the introduction of Bisky, the return of Hisoka, the epic dodgeball match, and the wild fights at the end. Then there's the Chimera Ant arc, which is often lauded as being the best arc in all of anime, and while I don't quite agree with that, I can definitely see why people think that, and it really is one of the best. I must admit that I thought the arc dragged on for too long. It is 61 episodes after all, the same length as Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I can't deny how well thought out it is, and it has some of the best moments in not just anime, but TV in general. The lore of NGL, the build up to the Chimera Ants, the way their society works, the birth of the Royal Guards, Kite's fate, the birth of Meruem and Komagi playing Gungi, Gon confronting P2, Meruem's amazing development, Gon's amazing regression, Killua's amazing development of Godspeed, the catastrophic palace invasion, the effective time dilation combined with the superbly utilized narrator, Netero's insane backstory and abilities, Netero vs Meruem, the social commentary, Gon's realization of Kite's fate, Gon vs P2, Meruem's and Komagi's final moments together, the payoff to the Kurt and Reina family, and of course the way the arc wraps up and immediately transitions to the next. These are absolutely incredible moments that sets this arc apart from the rest. I've been hesitant to call Chimera Ant my favorite arc of the series because of how much it drags, but it honestly has to be my favorite, since it's what turned this show from being great to flat out amazing. Given that the Hunter election arc came right after the highlights of the whole show, it might have felt a bit underwhelming, but it's still a very good arc, and I absolutely adored that Killua was basically the main character of it. I find it amazing that he has a legion of skilled butlers on his side. He just owns everyone and everything, including his own family, and his relationships with Gon and Alaka are too precious. I also loved seeing Leorio again, who probably showed his best moments as well. While I felt a bit disappointed with the ending, due to how many open threads there were, I don't see how they could have ended it better given that the manga itself hasn't ended, so it was a great series final in that respect. While I do think that the pacing is this show's worst aspect, it's overall an amazing show and delivers some of the best writing I've ever witnessed. Number 3. My Hero Academia. While Hunter x Hunter is excellent, I don't enjoy it quite as much as My Hero Academia, and that's a series that just keeps getting better and better. Even though it also has loads of episodes, and is bound to surpass Hunter x Hunter in that regard eventually, I find it more approachable due to its short arcs and fast pace. Things happen and get resolved quickly, which might come off as a bad thing, but the thing is that while the arcs are resolved quickly, there are many plot points that don't get elaborated upon until much later. Every arc feeds into the next, and the transitions are very obvious but also very seamless. I started watching My Hero Academia in 2018, so I've only covered its third season and the first half of season 4, so it's nice that I finally get to talk about its first couple of seasons. I wouldn't say the first season of MHA is brilliant, but I did really like it, and it has a few episodes that I love, with genuinely emotional moments. That's something this series does so well, tugging at your heartstrings, and the music plays a big part in that. It's also because the show really makes me care about many of these characters from the get-go, or later on, as is the case with Todoroki, who really shone in season 2. It was episode 10 of that season that made me truly love the show. I continued to love it as season 2 went on, where Stain was a fascinating villain who brought the best fight scene up until that point, and was surprisingly impactful for the story moving forward. I also liked seeing the students fight the teachers for their exam, in particular Momo and Todoroki versus Aizawa and Deku and Bakugo versus All Might. I think season 2 made best use of its characters, showcased the best and most consistent animation, and made the plot a lot deeper, so it was my favorite season for the longest time. That is until season 3, well, not really, but if that whole season had kept the quality of its first half, then yeah, it would have been. That first half is flat out amazing, with 2 awesome arcs that really upped the stakes and brought some of the most impactful moments of the series thus far. The latter half was a bit disappointing in comparison, but it did have an amazing conclusion. I'll admit that the set of Season 4 episodes that came out within 2019 wasn't the best, especially considering the production value had declined a bit, but I did love some of those episodes, in particular the last one about Lemillion. That's not my favorite episode of MJ from the last decade though. That would either go to Season 2, Episode 10, Shoto Todoroki Origin, Season 3, Episode 11, One for All, or Season 3, Episode 23, Deku vs. Kachan Part 2. 2 years ago, I said my favorite episode of Season 3 was One for All, and I discussed Deku vs. Kachan Part 2 when I talked about Bakugo being my favorite character in Season 3, so I'll take this opportunity to talk about Shoto Todoroki Origin. Like I said, this was the episode that made me love the show, and for good reason. It's got a really engaging fight where both Deku and Todoroki struggle, and it's definitely the highlight of both characters. Deku showing his absolute determination to have Todoroki fight with all his might, and Todoroki confronting his past demons and showcasing the best animation he's ever had. It also ended quite unexpectedly, the main character losing, but that really was for the best. I also liked seeing inspections from the crowd, specifically from Bakugo, who isn't as one-note as he may seem. MJ has one of the biggest casts of characters ever, so it's incredibly tough for me to decide who my favorite is, but I'm going with Deku. The show made me instantly like him in the first season, even though he is a crybaby, but he develops past that as the show goes on. He's also an absolute madman, who has no qualms about breaking himself. I'd say his best moment was in his fight against Todoroki, but I also love how heroic he acted while protecting Koda in Season 3. His actions after that did annoy me a bit, but it also made him more interesting all the same. While he might not even be top 5 in Season 4, he's still very prominent and fun. I especially love how he's trained himself to replicate All Might's face. That's comedy gold right there. I unfortunately can't include the show's excellent second half of Season 4, but I still love the previous content enough for it to be number 3 on this list. Number 2. Game of Thrones. Here's the big one, the amazing decade-defining TV show that sadly ended quite badly, but hey, I still enjoyed the last seasons. That's not enough to become number 1 though, and I did not enjoy Season 7 or 8 anywhere near as much as the others. Well, except 5. I didn't like that one very much either. I did love Season 6 though, despite its many faults, but it brought some of my favorite moments, like Hold the Door, Battle of the Bastards, and pretty much the entirety of the season final, which is still my favorite episode. The Winds of Winter has the best directed 15 minutes I've probably ever seen in TV, the excellent Light of the Seven music accompanying the destruction of the Sept of Baelor. It was also incredible to finally get a heartfelt confirmation for who Jon Snow really is, although it didn't exactly amount to much in retrospect. While I mostly found Season 5 boring and often questionable, it did have its moments too, especially Hardhome, but again, that didn't really amount to much either. The best thing about the last seasons is their production value, which is the biggest a TV show has ever had, I believe, rivaling that of movies. The whole series has incredible spectacles and it only improved as the years went by. It's just a shame that the writing didn't. The real meat of the story shows in its first half, that being seasons 1 to 4, and they're absolutely amazing pieces of television, with phenomenal interconnected stories and lore that surely must have taken ages to connect. It's such an expansive story with dozens of important characters that get so much depth and development, including but not limited to the honorable Ned Stark, sheltered but also honorable Jon Snow, feisty Arya Stark who breaks away from traditional norms, redemptive Jaime Lannister who starts out so hateable but becomes one of the most lovable, his intimidating dad and sister Tywin and Cersei Lannister, and his hilarious and ingenious little brother Tyrion Lannister, who's my favorite character in the series. He unfortunately declines from Season 5 and onwards, but he was so spectacular throughout the first 4 seasons that I just can't drop him as my favorite. Like Arya, he also goes against the grain, being a dwarf who's expected to be as worthy as a cripple or a bastard, even his father thinks so, but he owns that identity, using it as a protective shield. Also, he has the best ploys maybe aside from Varys and Littlefinger, and is just absolute comedy gold. If he had stayed as consistent throughout the whole thing, he might have been my favorite character in all of fiction to be honest, but as it stands, he's probably still top 5. Many of the interactions between these amazing characters are so well written and offer some of the best dialogue I've heard. Conversations between Ned and Robert, or Tyrion and Bronn, or Varys and Littlefinger just feel so natural and carry so much weight to them. It's excellent stuff. I also love how unpredictable the plot is, while rarely ever feeling cheap, at least in the first half of the show, and the plot progression is very seamless. Bold moves are made that I would otherwise probably hate if it had been any other show, but Game of Thrones just does it so well, again until a certain point. As unlikely as it seems, it would be fantastic if George R.R. Martin could finally finish his A Song of Ice and Fire book series so that we may get a good conclusion. Maybe he wouldn't offer a satisfying final, but hey, it's probably better than what Dumb and Dumber ended up doing. If the story does eventually wrap up, I hope to God, well, all of God's gods, that the series gets remade. That could potentially become my favorite show, at least on this list. Number 1. Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan might not offer characters, dialogue, or spectacle as strong as those you'd find in Game of Thrones, but what it has over it is actual satisfying payoff, which definitely comes a long way. Now, the show hasn't actually finished yet, so who knows, it might turn out the same, but in the last decade, AOT was practically the most consistent show to come out, and many of its most pressing questions have already been answered. That's mainly thanks to Season 3, Episode 20 with the name of That Day, not to be confused with Season 1, Episode 2, even though they actually share the same name. Still, one is better than the other, and while the second episode of the show is really good, the third to last episode of Season 3 is absolute god tier. This episode is the culmination of all the questions and foreshadowing leading up to it, and gives such satisfying payoff to them. It's an episode you can't just watch once, as it's jam-packed with information and mind-blowing revelations that you'll have to think on for a while. Of course, I can't undervalue how terrific the rest of the show is, as that's what made this episode so damn incredible in the first place. I started AOT all the way back in 2013 when it originally aired, and I remember watching through that season fairly quickly, as I was so hooked. It was the first anime I took seriously, and I got rewarded for it, since it just got better and better as the series progressed. Okay, I didn't like Season 2 or the first half of Season 3 quite as much as the first when I originally watched them, but I've grown to love them about as much, if not more. Season 1 has the captivating origins, incredible fight scenes, and shocking moments just about every episode. Season 2 takes the mystery aspect to the max, giving very few answers and a lot more questions, but it works since the mysterious element is one of the best things about the show. Season 3 is for sure my favorite season, as it answers so many questions and gives some of the best moments, even ones that don't include any Titan action. Like, the whole bloodline thing is so intricate, where certain bloodlines can't have their memories manipulated, whereas others can, and the whole political intrigue was indeed super intriguing. It's this kind of depth that felt so rewarding, and while I was itching to finally get to the basement, I didn't think any of the preceding events wasted my time, and it made for a more natural progression. There are really good reasons why the Survey Corps can't just go to the basement anytime they'd like, and it's not before the government is overthrown that they can. When it comes to my favorite characters of the show, it comes down to 3, those being Armin, Erwin, and Levi. While I can see myself liking Armin and Levi more after Season 4 since they're still alive, I think Erwin is still my favorite. I've sung his praises so many times, so I guess there's not much else to say about him, but he really does have balls of steel, delivers the most inspirational speeches I've ever heard, and with such incredible voice acting in not just Japanese, but English as well. Let me talk about the other 2 as well. Armin is a precious young lad who grows so much over the course of the seasons, being so cowardly and timid in the beginning, but by Season 3, he is, to quote Aaron, more of a hero than anyone else. Just like Erwin, Armin also sacrifices himself to retake Volshiganshina, and while he didn't quite die, he very much succeeded. Also like Erwin, he's a tactical mastermind and so dependable. He'll become such a great leader, and I'm looking forward to him turning into the Colossal Titan. Levi can be seen as the sequel to Mikasa, but he's really the prequel, as it did come first, and not only does he have the amazing prowess of Mikasa, but he actually has character to him as well. He's brilliant in Seasons 1 and 3, where he's a very prominent figure and proves to be very sentimental despite not seeming like it. He actually made the choice to spare Armin over Erwin, who's been such a near and dear friend to him. I also love the scene in episode 22 of Season 1 where he doesn't reprimand the grieving soldier who foolishly went out to retrieve his friend's dead body, but instead gives him a patch from the jacket of one of Levi's dead squad members. That showed so much humanity in him, even though it would be completely understandable if Levi had executed the guy for doing something so reckless out of order. Levi even has a 2-episode OVA dedicated to him, called No Regrets, which furthers his awesome character, and that's by far the best OVA I've seen. I've been rambling about AOT for a while now, but to wrap up the countdown, let me just say that Attack on Titan is a superbly well executed mystery that only gets better, and hopefully it can end amazingly as well. So, that was my incredibly long video about my top 12 TV shows of the decade, and I'm exhausted. Last decade was a phenomenal decade for TV shows, I'd say, so good in fact that I just had to include 12. How about that? As usual, Attack on Titan remains the victor, and it can continue to be with the next season, if it delivers. I hope many other amazing shows come out during this decade too, so I can present more quality-filled countdowns. I limited my talk a bit for some of these shows, as some of them have also aired episodes this year, but I'll talk about those in a countdown of my top 10 2020 shows, at least if they make the cut. As for a countdown about my absolute favorite TV shows, that isn't limited by time, I'm not quite ready to make that yet. I want at least AOT to finish first before I make that, since it could make all the difference, either going up or down, but hopefully the former. It might just stay in the position it's already in, which I won't reveal here. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully you'll see me next time!